Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. I do hope you're doing remarkably well. I'm doing great, thank you very much. And we've got a story that you're going to love tonight, where a young girl was so bedazzled by a beautiful house she saw when she was 7 years old that belonged to a friend of hers, and she just is drawn back to that home where the rather unusual experiences you're going to hear about are going to be revealed in this story. So before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, pleased to meet you, Mrs. Nestor, said Mrs. Parker, the realtor, looking at me with keen, eager eyes that certainly suggested she could smell a sail on the wind, almost as discernibly as the wood smoke from a barbecue. I hoped I hadn't sounded too eager on my cell phone call with Mrs. Parker, when she'd called me to arrange a time to meet up with her, to look around the Prt1of4 house. Sometimes I gave myself away, when I was overly ebullient about things. My husband Luton often describes me as being emotionally rambunctious, rather like a young, very spirited Labrador. And he's not wrong about that. I'm in my early 30s, and sometimes it seems as if I can't rein in my enthusiasm. The reason I was so incredibly excited about the Prt1of4 property coming up for sale was I'd practically dreamed of owning this gorgeous historic 1800s home all my life, and I'm not exaggerating when I say this. I cannot tell you how many times over the years I had driven past the Prt1of4 residence, secretly hoping and praying I'd see a for sale sign outside the property. But I never ever did. It would seem frustratingly that the owners that lived in the property remained there fixedly, and it looked like that would be the case for the foreseeable future. At one time I drove down the long driveway to the Prt1of4 house and clandestinely took photographs of the property. The lady of the house had come out, asking me if I was lost or something. I pretended that I was, and she kindly gave me directions to the local town. I then asked her rather brazenly, "Would you ever consider selling this house of yours any time in the future?" And the woman had looked at me matter-of-factly and said, "No, there's no chance of that, I'm afraid. I'm very attached to this place. I would never dream of selling this house." And that was me, hearing my worst fears being confirmed by this woman. I was about 22 years old at the time, so I got those photographs I had taken of the Prt1of4 house printed. I industriously made a vision board for myself with the photographs of the house that I had taken, hoping that if I looked at them every single day, that I'd ultimately get to own the place against all the odds. I had learned from watching a television program that if you imagined yourself living in a particular house, it would happen. But it was all wishful thinking on my part, because the vision board never came to anything. I promptly threw it away in disgust, as I came to the prompt realization that just because you could visualize something in the vain hope that it might happen, didn't actually mean it would. When I told my mother at the time what the vision board was all about, she practically laughed in my face and told me that the idea that you could manifest your desires by looking at a bunch of photographs every day was nothing short of ludicrous. "What a nonsensical idea, sweetheart. I've been dreaming all my life of owning a property in Barbados, and it's never ever happened for me. Whoever dreamed up such nonsense was giving people false hope, and they should be ashamed of themselves." And I realized my mother was right. I first laid eyes on the Prt1of4 house when I was 6 years old, maybe 7. I had befriended a girl from school called Beau Constantine, who had invited me to spend the weekend at her home. At the time I lived in a small semi-detached house in the town, an hour and a half away from the Prt1of4 property, which overlooked the Cascade Mountains. "Ma'am," I said when she'd picked me up from the Prt1of4 house in her clapped-out old Mazda that day, after I'd spent my first weekend with the Constantines. "I belong here." My mother looked at me with a quizzical raised brow and said, "No, sweetheart, you don't. You do not belong in a stranger's home. You belong at home with me, your father, and your 2 brothers. This is Beau's parents' home. I can see why you like the place so much. It's positively charming, as an 1800s property with such a stunning lake and magnificent groves of trees. What is there not to like about this place? I wouldn't mind living here myself. So I perfectly understand your attraction to this property. In truth, I was rather worried you'd feel this way about Beau's house. I'm afraid a house like this doesn't come cheap. Me and your father could never afford a place like this, although of course I wish we could. I imagine Beau's parents have got a great deal of money. Not all of us are that fortunate, but I want you to know, love, that even though we don't have as much as the Constantines so obviously do, we love you more than you can ever imagine. And you cannot put a price on love. At the end of the day, love is all that matters.
Ma'am, I know all that. I know we're not rich like the Constantines are. I'm not stupid. It's not about the money at all, nor is it about the things that Beau has. It's the house.
What about the house? My mother asked me.
It feels like home to me. I feel like I belong there.
My mother tweaked my cheek affectionately and chuckled. You are very funny, Lainey. I'll give you that. I'm not remotely surprised that Trevelly House feels like home to you. Let's not kid. Luxury is very comforting. I would feel at home in a house like this. I think anybody would. It was surrounded by lush acres of luxurious green grass that upholstered the lawn in rich, resplendent rolling carpets that were utterly magnificent to behold. And if that wasn't enough eye candy for you, there were hundreds of flower beds on the property, with beautiful flowers mingling together in colourful ensembles. There was a prepossessing silvery lake on the property, surrounded by a collection of ancient weeping willow trees, where bent boughs hung over the reflectant surfaces of the water. The house was flanked by wood groves of tall, lofty trees, all very impressive in size, and many of them pretty ancient-looking. They stretched out for miles. I was told by Mrs. Constantine that the property had once been 4 times its original size, but parts of the land had been sold off to other farms in the immediate area. So you could say the Trevelly property, although sizable, was still manageable. I think the Trevellys must have hired help to keep their lawns that pristine. My parents had always been pretty poor, and the dingy property we lived in at the time was well overdue a makeover, but I never noticed how badly unkempt it was until I returned from my first weekend at the Trevelly house, and then suddenly the horrible stain on the hall carpet, that looked like someone had spilt half a jar of olive oil over it, seemed badly pronounced. The scattering of stains on the ceiling caused by a leaking geyser looked like someone had emptied their bowels all over the white surfaces. My mother had industriously attempted to cover those pitiful stains with a lick of white paint, but for some reason they kept reappearing. The landlord of our home, Mr. Pickle, spent as little as possible in improving the block of semi-detached homes that he rented out to folks like my parents. Everything in that house was dingy, and even the mismatched threadbare furnishings that my mother had bought at thrift shops over the years were pretty bleak. It didn't help that the house smelt of damp and mildew, mixed with the unpleasant stench of cigarettes, as my mother was addicted to smoking, and sometimes she'd leave her ashtrays on the coffee table, filled with hundreds of unsightly cigarette butts. But thankfully later on in life she gave up the nasty habit, when a doctor told her if she didn't give up smoking, she'd surely get lung cancer. Our landlord at the time was called Mr. Pickle. He would arrive punctually at the front door the first day of every single month, wearing a formidable, rather intimidating scowl on his face. I never liked him very much. "You've got my rent for me, have you, Mrs. Morgan?" My mother would say, "But of course, Mr. Pickle," and would hand him a roll of banknotes that she'd removed from the cookie jar in the kitchen. Mr. Pickle would stand there in the doorway, with his boot anchoring the door firmly in place, and he would carefully, rather gingerly, sift through the notes, counting them twice over to ensure the money was all there. And worse still, he'd check the watermarks on the note to ensure that the money was not fake. "It's all there, Mr. Pickle. I can promise you that," my mother would say. "I wouldn't dream of cheating you, Mr. Pickle." "That's what they all say," Mr. Pickle would say. But I've learned from experience that not all people can be completely trusted, Mrs. Morgan. And sometimes, let's just say, the ones who look the most innocent are the worst offenders in my experience.
Mr. Pickle was the kind of landlord that would turf you out of your home in a heartbeat if you didn't pay your rent on time. My mother would say there wasn't a soft bone in that man's body, where he might make allowances for someone who was a little hard up. My mother had seen him ruthlessly throw people out onto the street the moment they couldn't pay their rent. My parents made absolutely certain that they could cover the rent every single month, even if it did mean we had to cut down on the food bill rather drastically, which did sometimes rather unfortunately happen. The last thing my parents wanted for our family was for us to end up homeless or on the streets. My father worked as a manager for a local restaurant in town, but he didn't earn a great deal of money. My parents sacrificed a great deal for me and my brothers. I became friends with Beau Constantine, who was one of the rich kids at school, and I think my parents felt rather uncomfortable about our friendship. I think they were concerned that my rich friend would only show me exactly what I was missing out in my own life. But when you're 6 or 7 years old, you don't see the world through an adult's ultra-critical eyes, nor do you connect everything to money. Those kinds of things were pretty insignificant to a child like myself. All that really mattered to me was playing with my friend Beau and having a whole lot of fun. I was, of course, poignantly aware that Beau's parents were comfortably wealthy, and that she had much more sumptuously cosy things in life than I did. But my attraction to the Trevelli house ran far deeper than secretly wishing I was richer so that I could live in a house like Beau did. I genuinely felt I belonged in the Trevelli house, rather like a wild flower instinctively knows it belongs in the meadow, and planted anywhere else, and it might not even thrive. Why I felt the sense of belonging to a strange house that I only ever saw when I came over to play with Beau, I could never fathom, until one day when I was about 24 years old, my mother was told by my grandmother that in the 1800s a member of her side of the family, a man called Roland Trevelli, had built the Trevelli house for his beloved wife Nora. I couldn't believe the story was true, but my grandmother assured me it was. I wondered if possibly my ancestral connection to the Trevelli house had seduced me into feeling I belonged there. Was it possible that I felt some kind of subconscious family connection? I couldn't be sure. It certainly was news to me that in the 1800s members of my mother's side of the family had actually been wealthy, for I'd always believed I'd come from a somewhat impoverished working-class family background, where my relatives probably shifted coal for a living or worked as cleaners for wealthy people with money. But not so. My grandmother told me the Trevellis had been very affluent in the olden days, but the money in family wills was passed down to male members of their families, and the women in those days were expected to marry men of substantial means. But after the Second World War, it would seem, there was a dramatic shift in society, where many women who came from moneyed backgrounds chose to marry men who were more working class, which is probably what happened to my mother's side of the family, which was why the money line came to an abrupt end. I'm glad to say that my mother told me that Beau's parents were never snooty about her friendship with me when I was a little girl, even though they absolutely knew my parents lived on the poor side of town. It was, of course, notable that Beau never spent any time at my house, even though I invited her over many times, but her parents would politely, very graciously decline, and tactfully claim it would be easier if I stayed with them. I don't think that Beau's parents would have been seen dead driving their glamorous black Bentley into our less than agreeable neighbourhood, for that prestigious slick black car would certainly have stuck out like a sore thumb in our neighbourhood, and was probably worth more than most people's houses. Beau was like the sister to me that I never had. She was my best friend. She was a pretty child with blonde ringlets and big blue eyes. I had 2 older brothers, Emmett and Freddie, who were not interested in playing with their silly younger sister. They mocked me tirelessly for playing with dolls. Sadly, when Beau was 10 years old, her family sold the Trevelli house to the Glenwood family, and from what I gather, Beau's family moved to Australia. Her father was going to work for the American embassy there, and I never heard from her again. There are not many things that people tend to remember in their early years, unless those experiences mean a whole lot to them.
and staying with Beau Constantine in that magnificent house of hers was something I was never able to forget. It stuck to my memory like the chewing gum under a school desk that simply refused to budge. I always remembered when I was staying with Beau, there was a very pretty woman who wore a magnificent blue gown that would visit me and Beau when we were playing in her bedroom upstairs. The lovely lady in blue would join us for our little tea parties with our dolls. Every time we played games together, the woman would suddenly make an appearance. She seemed to just appear as if by magic. I remember asking Beau who she was, but Beau told me that the woman in blue was a secret and that I mustn't talk about her to anyone, so I never did. Well, not to anyone except, of course, my mother. I remember the day when Beau's mother entered the bedroom, when we were playing with the lovely lady in blue at our side. She asked us who we were talking to, as in her eyes there was a third person included in our conversation that she physically couldn't see. "Is it your invisible friend you're talking to again, Beau?" she asked her daughter.
"Yes, Mummy,"
Beau told her. I remember thinking to myself that Beau's mother must be as blind as a bat, because the lady in blue who was sitting next to us seemed larger than life to me. Beau told me that her mother couldn't see the lady in blue, which I remember thinking was profoundly odd. When you're that young and impressionable, you don't think too deeply about many things. So I accepted oddities as naturally as brushing my teeth every morning. As far as I was concerned, adults weren't desperately perceptive, and that included my own mother. Every time my mother came to pick me up from the Trevelli house, I'd put up such an amazing fuss and embarrass my mother in the process. I'd stamp my foot like a petulant spoilt brat and say, "I don't want to go home, Mummy. I want to stay here with Beau. I like it here." My best friend would say, "I don't want Lainey to leave either. Please can't she stay a little longer, Mrs. Morgan?" "I'm not sure that's a good idea," my mother would say, "but it's very kind of you to offer, Beau. Lainey is needed at home, I'm afraid." Beau's mother would smile warmly and say, "Well, you do know your daughter's welcome to stay for a few more days if she would like. Lacey's always an absolute pleasure to have around, and is no trouble at all, I can assure you of that." "That's very kind of you," my mother would say, "but Lainey needs to come home right now." My mother would guide me back to our clapped-up old Mazda that looked so out of place on such a grandiose property, like a piece of rusted old metal on the meticulous Constantine driveway. Her hand would be firmly anchored on my back as she guided me back to the car. Sometimes I would pull away from my mother's grasp and stand there on the driveway, staring up at Beau's bedroom window to see if I could see the lady in blue, and sure enough she was almost always standing there, waving down at me with a warm smile on her face, and I would wave back. My mother asked me who I was waving at when she saw me doing that once. I said to her, "I'm waving to the lady in blue who plays with us." My mother told me to stop being ridiculous, as there was no one standing in the window. I think my mother thought I'd become an overly imaginative child after spending far too much time with Beau, who would always talk about Peter Pan and fairies. I think my mother thought, as I had little in common with my two older brothers, that I was caught up in a world of make-believe with Beau, and I think Mrs. Constantine had similar feelings about the matter. Years later I would wonder if my mother was possibly right, and that the mysterious woman in the blue had all just been made up in my head, rather like an invisible friend that I'd conjured up to join me and Beau for our tea parties. But if that were indeed the case, why did I see her as clearly as I did? My memories of the lady in blue were so vivid that even at 35 years old, I could clearly see the detailed bodice of her dress, as well as the woman's elegant chignon, and the ringlets of curls that fell against her face so prettily, that brought out the grey-blue colour of her beautiful eyes. I remember details like that, which you don't remember in a dream. I married my husband Luton when I was 30 years old. I had, of course, told him all about the Trevelli house, and how I desperately wanted to live there one day. I was extremely fortunate that my husband was a man of significant means, thanks to making a great deal of money out of stocks and shares. But he had by no means come from a moneyed background. He just happened to be a great investor. I knew it was my dream to live in the Trevelli house one day. If it were to come on the market, of course. But unfortunately that magnificent historical home seemed resolutely determined to stay in the existent owner's hands, as if they had no intention of ever parting with the place. I couldn't exactly blame them for that. If I owned the Trevelli house, I'd never want to let it go. "Why are you so fixated on the place, Laney?" my husband would ask me, the puzzle lines creasing his forehead. Lucian was the kind of overly generous man that would give me the world if he could, and he was exceedingly frustrated that the Trevelli property was not something he could acquire for me, as it was obviously not for sale. I shrugged my shoulders. "I wish I could explain why I love the place so much," I told him, "but I can't. When I first laid eyes on the property, I must have been about 6 or 7 years old. I had been invited to stay at Beau's house for the weekend, and when my mother's battered Mazda rolled up that long, very posh driveway, and I stared at the property, I was in wondrous awe, let me tell you. I'd never seen a more magnificent house in all my life. It was as if I'd slipped into a parallel universe of some kind, where everything was so much more spectacular and grand, much more so than my current reality. I really felt like I belonged in that house. It was almost as if the home was calling my name. It's hard to explain, really. I tried to tell my mother how I felt about the place, but I think she thought I was fantasizing about living in luxury, but it was never like that." "You probably were secretly impressed, love," my husband said. "You didn't really know it at the time because you were very young. I mean, you were living in a very mediocre semi-detached house in a bad state of repair that you rented from a dodgy landlord on the bad side of town. Is it any wonder that when you saw that marvellous historic red brick mansion, steeped in a rich, vibrant history, that Beau was living in with both of her parents, that it made your semi-detached house look like a dump? You were very impressed by that grandiose property, I'm most sure. It must have made one hell of an impression on you. You were probably used to living on the rough side of town, and then you encounter people of significant means who live like royalty. It must have come as one hell of a culture shock for you. I'm sure as a little girl who loved pretty things, that stunning home was like something plucked out of a fairy tale for you."
"It wasn't like that, Luton. That's what I'm trying to explain to you, but you're obviously not getting it. You're beginning to sound exactly like my mother. I really felt as if I belonged in that house, as if I should be living there, as if the Trevelli house was really my true home."
"But surely a house with similar-looking qualities would tick the right boxes for you," Luton insisted. "I'm sure we could buy a very sizable historic home that resembled the Trevelli property, and you would be extremely happy with that. We could find the perfect home to start a family in. But surely it doesn't have to be the Trevelli house."
"You don't get it. You don't understand, Luton. I don't want to live in any other house that looks like the Trevelli house. I'm not interested in substitutes, even if the architecture is authentic. I want to live in the Trevelli house. I don't want to compromise. I've always believed that I was meant to live there." My husband shook his head sadly and said, "I don't understand your fixation on the Trevelli house, love. I'm sorry, but I don't. As far as I'm concerned, houses are mere bricks and mortar." "No, they're not. That's just it. They're not bricks and mortar, Luton. They're so much more. I can't believe you don't get what I'm trying to tell you. Don't you see that houses have oodles of personality, character and charm? They actually breathe an energy that you can pick up and perceive instinctively. That's how I feel about the Trevelli house. I love its warm, cosy energy. It draws me in every time, even though I haven't been there for years, but I still believe it would have the same effect on me now."
"I can't say I agree with you on this energy thing you keep harping on about," said Luton. "I go into houses all the time, and when they're nicely decorated and well presented, I can't say I think to myself that I like the energy of the house. I've never thought of houses in that way. People and pets may be, but houses definitely not. Houses aren't living entities, are they?"
"You feel that way, Luton, because you are more acquainted with modern homes.
I mean, this house we're currently living in together is brand new, isn't it? No one has ever lived here before. Houses like this are like blank canvases. And when you live in a place like this, your energy paints that canvas. And in generations to come, that energy will be perceived by others, which may make people repelled or actually drawn to this house.
You really believe that's how energy works, do you?
My husband asked me rather curiously. Absolutely, I insisted. The way I see it, energy is like a magnet. You can be drawn to it or drawn away from it. It's quite simple, really. When we met each other, Luton, we were drawn to each other in an attraction that goes beyond human understanding and comprehension. But it's there and it's real. What you find attractive, Luton, another man might find repellent, nondescript even, or ordinary. We're all drawn to different people and places. Two people can look at the same house or travel to the exact same destination and have completely different impressions about the places or people. Think about it. You've dated lots of women over the years before you met me, and you always said something was off with those women. So much so you could never settle into those relationships comfortably, as on an energetic level the fit was not snug enough for you. But those girls you met will be perfect for somebody else. Well, that's how I feel about the Trevelli house. I feel it's perfect for me, like a pair of shoes you put on, and they're so comfortably snug, you never ever want to take them off.
So let's get this right. It's the energy of the Trevelli house you find very attractive. Is that what you're saying? That's what draws you to the place?
Finally, you get it, Luton. That's exactly what I'm saying. The Trevelli house, believe it or not, was built by a wealthy ancestor of mine, back in the 1800s. A man of substantial means. He was a distinguished gentleman called Roland Trevelli. He built the house for his wife Nora. I think one of Nora's daughters or granddaughters perhaps married someone who worked on the mines, which is why my mother's family line was cut off from all that family inheritance and wealth. My husband raised a brow.
Good Lord, you never told me any of this. Do you think it's possible that the blood connection is drawing you to the Trevelli house, given ancestors of yours owned the place? If that's the case, I kind of get why you might have been drawn to the property. They say blood is thicker than water, don't they? That's probably what is going on here, don't you think?
I can't answer that question for you, Luton. I suppose it's a distinct possibility.
I remember you telling me about the lady in blue that would play with you and your best friend Beau when you were having tea parties with your dolls in her bedroom. Do you think she was an invisible friend or a ghost? The woman in blue, I mean. They often say little kids can pick up on spiritual energies in a home. And given the Trevelli house has a vibrant history, who's to say the woman in blue wasn't a ghostly apparition that only Beau and you could see?
That's another question I wish I could answer for you, Luton. I've often wondered why it was that I vividly remember a woman in blue joining us for all our tea parties with our dolls when we were little. Beau could see the woman in blue as clearly as I could, but Beau's mother certainly couldn't. Now, all these years later, I wonder if I made her up in my own imagination. But if I did, why can I vividly see in my mind's eye every single detail of that woman's bodice, and how she actually wore her hair? I mean, when I imagine things normally, I never visualize details quite as specific as that.
It is extraordinary, my husband admitted. Maybe the woman in blue is linked to the house in some way. Who knows? Maybe you were seeing Nora Trevelli, the original lady of the manor. Maybe if you found a photograph of the woman, you'd be able to see for yourself if she's the same lady you encountered as a little girl.
So you do believe in ghosts, then? I asked my husband, looking at him in astonishment, for I never believed for a second Luton would be so open-minded about such paradoxical things, as most men I knew pooh-poohed such nonsensical ideas, for they are often driven to only believe in things they can physically see.
Don't look so surprised, Lenny. I'll have you know I'm pretty open-minded about many things. I think it's arrogant to a fault not to acknowledge that ghosts could be real.
So there we are. That is the end of part 1 of our story. Part 2 is tomorrow night, and I look forward to you joining me then. Until next time, goodbye and good night.